Stravinsky's melodies are usually based on short fragments, often segments of scales that are repeated and combined in various ways. The repetition makes them memorable and distinctive. In the Rite of Spring, the melodies are central to the drama. In an almost Wagnerian way, the melodies, like Wagner's leitmotifs, often denote a particular character or dramatic situation. I have therefore attached descriptive labels to all of the principal melodies, from the opening folk tune to the chosen one's final cry. Most of the melodies in the Rite of Spring lie within one of three intervallic frames, a perfect fourth, a tritone, or a perfect fifth. The melodies within a perfect fourth usually represent human characters, like the young women or the young men. The melodies within a tritone usually represent fantastic characters, like the 200-year-old woman and half beast. And the melodies within a perfect fifth often represent the sounds of the natural world. The melodies that lie within a perfect fourth generally fill that interval as a tone, semitone, tone, or Dorian tetrachord. The melodies meander through the tetrachord, moving in fits and starts, but generally in a descending direction, with the top note as the source and the bottom note as the imperfectly attained goal. Most of these melodies embed at least one direct scalar descent through the tetrachord. The melodies generally have the feel of heaviness, of being pulled down to the earth. In that way, they resonate suggestively with frequently remarked aspects of Nijinsky's original choreography. Let's look at some of the many melodies that lie within the melodic frame of a perfect fourth. Here is the melody of the young men as they learn divination from the old woman. The masculine association is reinforced by scoring for bassoons in octaves in a low register. The principal melody of Spring Rounds, which I call the Spring Rounds Procession, is prefigured in Augurs of Spring. In both places, it is danced by the entire ensemble, with men and women in separate groups. Scored for mixed ensemble with heavy planing, it suggests a slow, solemn, almost religious procession. This melody, which I call the Women's Entreaty, is a musical representation of the women as they try to intercede in the warlike games among the men, beseeching the men to moderate their violence. It is a sort of feminine second theme in a mostly militaristic scene. A relatively lyrical setting with wind instruments in a high register with light planing accompaniment. The Earth melody is part of a wild, orgiastic dance for male and female dancers. This is the second main melody in Mystic's Circle of the Young Women. It is choreographically a circle dance. Its scoring for solo alto flute, its expressive markings, piano cantabile, and its lyrical quality all mark it as feminine in affect. This sentence of doom is heard as the tribal ancestors and elders pass their final fatal judgment on the chosen one. It is scored initially for muted trumpets, soft and ominous, and later for massed French horns playing triple forte. Melodies framed by a perfect fourth often feature a lower neighbor note, which decorates the lowest note of the span. This opening folk tune is the only actual folk melody in the ballet that is complete and used in something like its original presentation. It represents the primitive pastoral. The young women's melody marks their entrance on stage and accompanies their first dance. This is another version of the Earth melody, now in chattering 16th notes. It is part of a wild orgiastic dance for both male and female dancers, scored for trumpets and violins. The Dorian tetrachord is sometimes presented only in part, with 025 or 035 standing in for the complete 0235. The melody I'm calling Nature Melody number 3 is one of a number of melodies designed to represent sounds of nature, including ancient shepherds' reed pipes called dudki. The grace notes suggest folk styles of vocalization in this representation of the primitive pastoral, an effect enhanced by instrumentation for English horn. The four-note motto ostinato that runs through the entire Augurs of Spring is associated initially with the male dancers as they learn divination from the old woman, but persists through the dances of the young women. It lies within a perfect fourth, filled out as an incomplete Dorian tetrachord. The sage's melody represents the sage and the tribal elders from the first moment they come on stage. It is scored for tubas and marked molto pesante, suggesting that the sage and elders are ancient, weighty male characters. The lower neighbors lie either a semitone or a whole tone beneath the lowest note of the perfect fourth melodic frame. A second melody associated with the sage and the tribal elders, the sage's counter melody is scored for horns and similarly fills in the melodic frame of a perfect fourth as an incomplete Dorian tetrachord. The second of the three principal melody types involves melodies that fall within the span of a tritone. Some of these tritone-based melodies divide the tritone into two minor thirds, 3+3, or 0-3-3-6. The upper minor third is typically filled in chromatically, and as with the 0-2-3-5 melodies, the 0-3-3-6 melodies usually descend. Melodies of this type are strongly associated with the old woman, half human and half beast. She is hundreds of years old, a seer and a diviner. More broadly, these melodies are associated with the exotic or the fantastic. There are premonitions of the old woman's melody in the instrumental introduction to Part 1. When the old woman arrives on stage at the beginning of Augurs of Spring, we hear her melody in its definitive form. Exotic melody number 3, chromatic, snaky, serpentine, is one of three such tunes with which the ancestors and elders seek to mesmerize and immobilize the chosen one. In addition to its division into two minor thirds, the tritone may also be divided into three major seconds as 2 plus 2 plus 2, or 0, 2, 4, 6. Melodies organized like this, like all the melodies in the Rite of Spring, tend to move downward. 0, 2, 4, 6 melodies are particularly conspicuous in the wild dances of life or death that come at the ends of the two parts of the ballet, the dance of the earth and the sacrificial dance. They often seem to suggest either the mysterious mystical or an implacable fate. The earth fanfare is part of a wild orgiastic dance of life. The theme of final judgment, representing an implacable fate, the ancestors and elders, many dressed in bearskins, close in on their sacrificial victim and pronounce her doom. The 0, 2, 4, 6 frame is sometimes presented only in part, as a pair of whole tones or as a single whole tone. Despite the partial presentation, these melodies are still usually suggestive of the mysterious mystical or the implacable fateful. This little melody is part of a mysterious, sinuous two-part counterpoint for two trumpets. Later, this tune is used by the ancestors and elders as they mesmerize and immobilize their sacrificial victim. With this exotic, sinuous chromatic melody within an 0, 2, 4 frame, exotic melody number 1, the ancestors and elders charm and ensnare their victim. This circle dance for old men is another chromatic melody moving within a whole tone frame, in this case 0, 4. It is used by the elders and ancestors as they circle their victim, but this one is more aggressive than charming. This is the chosen one's cry, her principal tune, as she enacts her dance of death. The fatality motive represents an implacable fate. It is associated with the tribal elders and ancestors who surround the chosen one and demand her death. Scored for trumpets and trombones, marked fortissimo marcato, it is as loud, violent, and brutal as anything in the ballet. The third of the three principal melody types involves melodies that fall within the frame of a perfect fifth. Usually, the perfect fifth is filled in as 0257, and these melodies are often associated with the sounds of the natural world, including the pastoral woodwind pipes and the gentler side of nature. Sometimes the perfect fifth melodies are further filled in as 02357 or 02457, that is, as minor or major scalar pentachords. These tunes are often associated with a darker side of nature, including human nature in its animalistic, violent, aggressive aspect. Nature melody number 1 is the first of several melodies in the introduction to Part 1 that represent the sounds of the natural world, including the traditional shepherd's pipes. The melody is scored for solo English horn, the traditional instrument for the pastoral expressive mode, and the grace notes evoke a folk style of vocalization. Here is nature melody number 4. The shepherd's pipes are now evoked by a solo oboe. The melody sounds a bit like a bird call, another pastoral topic. Another nature melody from the introduction to Part 1, I'm calling it nature melody number 5. The shepherd's pipes are now evoked by a piccolo clarinet, and again the melody sounds a bit like a bird call. The Mystic Circle first theme within its 0257 frame has a natural, sweet, unforced quality. We're talking here not about shepherd's pipes and bird calls, but about something simple and unsophisticated. It is the principal melody for young women to dance their mysterious, ritualistic circle dance. When the framing perfect fifth is filled in fully as 02357 or 02457, we still find musical representations of nature, but of its darker side, including the animalistic and aggressive aspects of human nature. Here is abduction fanfare number 1, violent martial music that represents the men seizing the women in an orgy of sexual violence. The rapid fanfare is marked fortissimo marcatissimo. Here is the second abduction fanfare, more musical celebration of male sexual violence, scored for tutti winds and brass with strings joining later. Abduction fanfare number 2 returns in a later scene, the ritual of two rival tribes, where it functions as the second tribe's fanfare. The music is still in a military expressive mode as the male dancers engage in martial display and warlike games of mock combat. The melodies belonging to each of the three types tend to congregate in certain pitch locations. In some cases, the pitch location conveys a reasonably consistent symbolic meaning. For example, melodies that lie within the perfect fourth G-sharp, C-sharp are associated with the sage, the elders, and the ancestors. More commonly, however, melodies of different character congregate at a specific location, creating somewhat heterogeneous families of association. For example, the natural home of melodies within the AD frame appears to be with the feminine and the pastoral, but alterations of the ABCD frame can create different expressive impacts. The shared frame heightens the expressive contrast. Melodies are characterized both by their type, 0235, 0336, 0246, 0257, and their pitch location, and both type and location may have dramatic and narrative significance. This ponderous melody, played in octaves by tubas molto pesante, announces the entrance and procession of the sage and the elders. It is framed by G sharp, C sharp. Much later in the ballet, using the same four melodic notes, the ancestors and the elders pronounce their sentence of doom on their sacrificial victim. Near the end of the concluding sacrificial dance, the ancestors and elders, many of them clad in bearskins, press in on the chosen one, again with the same four melodic notes. In Stravinsky's description of the moment, when she is on the point of falling exhausted, the ancestors recognize it and glide toward her like rapacious monsters. At the end of the introduction to Part 1, the opening folk tune is transposed down a semitone. It was at the pastoral level, A, B, C, D. Now it is at the level of the sage elders and ancestors, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp. I hear in this moment a premonition of doom and a prefiguring of the entire narrative arc of the ballet, from pastoral opening to a wild dance of death. The opening folk tune, within its AD frame, is the emblem of the feminized primitive pastoral. The same set of associations, feminized pastoral, is maintained when the young women's melody is transposed to AD toward the end of Augurs of Spring. Like these feminized pastoral melodies, the abduction hunting call lies within an AD frame. But the frame is stripped both of its Dorian fill and of its feminine and pastoral associations. Instead, it marks the men's violent pursuit of the women whom they hunt as prey. This is the women's entreaty from two rival tribes, the attempt by the women to moderate the violent excesses of the men's war games. Musically, it returns to the feminine focus of the AD frame. This is the fanfare for the first of the two rival tribes. It has been transposed to the pastoral level, ABCD. The prevailing expressive mode is military, but this is a celebratory moment with men and women dancing together harmoniously. This is the sage's countermelody, heard when he comes on stage for the first time. Its AD melodic frame is partially filled in as ACD. we're now more in a religious than a pastoral or military expressive mode. Within these melodic frames, the melodies meander, moving in fits and starts, stuttering and oscillating between adjacent notes, advancing toward goals and then withdrawing or attaining them weakly, or arriving again and again amid the repetition of individual notes and groups of notes. It is possible to trace the course of the melodies by taking the first statement as the source for successive variations. Usually, behind the first statement, there lurks an implicit prototype, a highly simplified normative layout in relation to which the first statement and all of the statements can be understood as variants. The melodic prototype is often a simple scalar ascent or descent through the melodic frame. The melodies themselves are extremely simple, a small intervallic frame filled by a few notes, but the musical paths through the frame are often irregular and unpredictable. In each of these aspects, we may infer a musical representation of the imagined primitive mind and body. Simple, unsophisticated, close to nature, instinctual, viscerally connected to the earth and to the tribe, and capable of great brutality. Like these melodies, the Stravinsky's imagined Neolithic body-mind is energetic, sometimes capricious, and even violent as it moves within its narrow, restricted frame. This is the young women's melody, heard right at the moment they come on stage for the first time. Its prototype lies within 3 measures of 2/4 time, an initial leap up from the bottom of the frame to the top, and then a stepwise descent. The last of the 3 bars receives particular emphasis through repetition. The melody is mostly descending and end-weighted. This melody, the Spring Rounds Procession, is a stately procession. It is implicitly based on a 2-bar unit that ascends and descends stepwise through its frame. The melody seems to have trouble getting started, with repetitive emphasis on its initial pitch. It struggles to get free of the gravitational pull of its lowest note. It is weighted toward its beginning. This melody, the Women's Entreaty, involves mostly a stepwise descent through its 2-0-2-3-5 frames. It is transposed in the middle from ABCD to DEFG. There is strong emphasis on the anacroustic ascent to the top of the frame. The young women dance their mysterious circle dance. The opening portion descends from its high point, the second portion ascends from its low point. The cadential convergence on D sharp is deferred until the final moment. The ancestors and elders pronounce their sentence of doom on the chosen one. a relentlessly descending melody weighted toward its ending on the frame's low point, strongly suggestive of an ineluctable fate. The melodies and melodic frames we have been discussing here are frequently transposed, creating meaningful pathways that may span large sections of music, up to entire scenes. These pathways follow interval cycles, repeated transposition by a single interval, usually 2, 3, or 7. The fact that the melodies being transposed contain these intervals gives the pathways a motific aspect. Intervals within and between the melodies are the same. Transposition along an interval cycle binds melodies together in a coherent chain and lends a sense of directionality to the musical action. In the introduction to Part 1, prominent descending minor thirds within tunes are aggregated into descending 3 cycles that span the scene. All 3 possible 3 cycles are traversed in their entirety. The third chain leads to the return of the opening melody 1 semitone lower than its starting point. In Dancing Out of the Earth, the wild climactic final scene of Part 1, Dorian tetrachords are projected along 7 cycles. The rising excitement of the crowd in its orgiastic celebration of spring is mirrored by the rising chain of perfect fifths. Successive statements of the abduction fanfare, the men's celebration of their triumph over the women, follow a 7 cycle that cuts across the border between the ritual of abduction and spring rounds. Just as the first movement of the ballet, the introduction to Part 1, projected its melodies along 3 cycles, diminished 7th chords, the last movement of the ballet, the sacrificial dance, projects its principal melody, the fatality motive, along 2 cycles, whole tone scales. These transpositions are both cyclic and motific. The melody itself spans 2 semitones, and it is transposed along 2 cycles. The melodic frames always consist of 2 intervals of the same size related by transposition. 0235, for example, can be thought of either as 2 2s related by T3 or 2 3s related by T2. The 4 principal melodic frames we have discussed so far, 0235, 0336, 0246, and 0257, can all be divided in this way. And so can other melodic frames that play a less conspicuous role in the music, including 0112, 0224, and 0347. To put it in terms of combination rather than division, These melodic frames can all be generated by combining an interval with a transposition of itself. As a result, the melodies can be varied and connected in a process of expansion or contraction by holding one of the intervals fixed and moving the other interval by a semitone. Variants of the same melody are often related in this way. One interval holds while the other moves by semitone, or possibly both intervals move, possibly by other intervals of transposition. Larger chains of motives and families of related motives are forged with a variety of expressive implications. The linking of melodies in this way may call attention to subtle affinities or heighten a sense of contrast. Two versions of the final judgment melody, representing 0246 and 0235, are related by intervallic voice leading. A-flat, B-flat holds, while C-D moves down a semitone to C-flat, D-flat. Each is a variant of the other. Two versions of the second main melody from Mystic Circle, representing 0235 and 0257, are related by intervallic voice leading. G-flat, A-flat holds, while E-flat, F moves down a whole tone to D-flat, E-flat. Intervallic voice leading binds two contrasting melodies from the two rival tribes. The first is a fanfare associated with the men's abduction of the women, and serves here as an emblem of the second of the two rival tribes. The second is the women's entreaty as they seek to calm the men. They share D-E, while G-A moves down a whole tone to F-G. The close voice-leading connection emphasizes the contrast between these melodies, one forceful and military, the other gentle, lyrical, and peaceful. In the introduction to Part 2, we hear numerous statements of the melody that later becomes the main tune in the following scene, the Mystic Circle. Over the course of the scene, the melody is transposed up a whole tone in stages via intervallic voice leading. The larger motion is motivic. The melody is made up of twos, and it is transposed by two. The final judgment melody, with which the sage elders and ancestors announce the chosen one's doom, is closely related, via intervallic voice leading, to melodies from earlier in the ballet that are associated with these characters. Melodies associated with the old woman and the ancestors, old, exotic, supernatural characters, are bound together by intervallic voice leading.